Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome. This is the video where I go through the challenge lab that has you create a Google Compute Engine instance and connect it up to a cloud storage bucket. Now I really hope that when you watch this video, you're watching it to see how I did it to compare it to how you've already done it yourself. That's the way this challenge lab was intended to work anyway. That said, I do realize that some people won't have gone through the challenge lab on their own first. But either way, I hope that when you're watching this, you're really trying to pay attention to the mental model of the data flows. Well, alright, how about you join me in the console? Okay, here we are in the console, and the first thing I'm going to do is to start Cloud Shell. I'm also going to put it into its own window. Now Cloud Shell here is going to connect to the project that I have selected, but that's alright because I'm not actually going to use Cloud Shell to do the command line version of this challenge lab. I'm just going to use Cloud Shell to get the script we need. Now, one of the first things we need to do is to create a new project for this challenge lab, because that was one of the requirements. And since creating a project takes a while, I'm going to switch over to that tab. We can drop the drop-down, say New Project, call it something like Challenge Lab GCE, say Create, and now this will take a little bit of time. So if we look at the script here, it starts out by saying that it'll echo the information so that it's a little easier to run. Then it'll update the installed packages on the machine, and then download and run the install script for Google's Stackdriver logging agent. Moves on to stressing the CPU for a bit. Then getting some metadata called lab-logs-bucket, and copying a log file to that place with the gsutil command. So this lab-logs-bucket is definitely going to be interesting, but we don't need it quite yet, so let's just leave this script up and head back to the console. Now we can switch to the Challenge Lab project and create the bucket we need. We say create bucket. Let's call this one Challenge Lab something. Challenge Lab GCE is still available. To keep it within the free tier, we'll make it a regional bucket in, say, US West 2, and we can create. The name of this bucket will be useful, so I'll just copy it. And we can head over to the Compute Engine section. Now this also takes a little bit of time to finish, so think about what's happening here. When we created the project, a number of APIs for different services were turned on by default. So those services went through whatever initialization they needed at that time. For Compute Engine, that doesn't happen automatically when you just create the project. You have to turn it on yourself. So here, it's going about doing things like creating service accounts, registering our account in the Compute Engine side of things, all sorts of things really. Whenever you have a situation where you have to wait, it's a good idea to be thinking about what's going on. Imagine what it's actually doing behind the scenes, because a lot of what happens is what you trigger, not necessarily what you do specifically. And that's actually a key thing about this challenge lab. The amount of action that you manage to trigger with just a few simple things is quite significant. Well, alright, looks like it finished initializing Google Compute Engine. So let's go ahead and make the GCE instance. We say create. You don't have to name it anything different, but I think I'll just tack on Challenge Lab to make it Challenge Lab Instance 1. This region and zone of US East 1B qualify for the free tier, so we can just leave that. It doesn't matter that the logs bucket is going to be on the west coast and the machine is going to be on the east coast. They'll still be able to talk to each other just fine. There'll just be a tiny extra delay. For free tier though, we want to set this to be an F1 micro instance. And now we can scroll down. It's important to leave the service account to be the Compute Engine default service account, but if we leave the scopes with the default access, we won't be able to write the logs to the bucket, so we'll need to make sure that it can write to storage. It doesn't actually need to be able to read, but writing is important. Since we're here, we can also notice that the Stackdriver logging and monitoring APIs are also already set to allow write access. And of course that's important for the Stackdriver agent to be able to work. Moving down, we'll need to expand the advanced options. It's optional, but we can set a label here. You can set whatever label you want, really. But if we scroll down here, this is where it really gets interesting. We're definitely going to need to set this startup script and also this metadata. Now I remember that the metadata was going to need the bucket name, so I may as well just paste that in now. But the format is in the gs://, and it might need a trailing slash as well, so I'll just set those right away. If I switch the tab, I can grab the startup script. I can paste that in. And then if I scroll up a little bit there, I can get the key name for the metadata that I'm going to set. So I'll copy that and paste it into the key. Well, now we've set the key things that we needed to set about this instance, so let's scroll down to the bottom and hit Create. Now off it goes. So here again is an instance where we're waiting. So what's going on? Can you, right now, think through all of the things that are happening behind the scenes? The data flow lecture that corresponds with this should hopefully clarify exactly what is going on, but it's really important for you to understand all of the things that happen, in what orders they happen, and why they happen. So now that the instance is at least running, we can click on the instance name and see some information about it. But it's this monitoring tab that's kind of interesting now. So far there's nothing happening, but there is stuff going on, so it'll just take a little bit of time for it to refresh. Well, while that's going on, I'm going to open up a couple more tabs so that we can check a few more places. For one of those tabs, I'm going to go to the bucket to see when the file gets written. No files yet, understandably. And for the other tab, I'm going to head over to Stackdriver. In the details for the VM instance, there's a handy little link that takes us directly there. Now I see that a lot of things are going on, and these last lines are exactly what I expect to see, that stress is running and outputting some information. Here it shows us that it ran the command stress-c8-t120 so that it uses 8 CPUs for 120 seconds. Now this machine doesn't have 8 CPUs, but this will basically just max out whatever it can use. If we refresh the monitoring tab, we see that a bit of the network activity has registered, which was presumably for updating the various installed packages and downloading the Stackdriver agent installer. But oh, here I see that it's updated. The CPU registers 223.36%, and then it drops down to about 100%. And this is what I would expect to see, because it's allowed to burst for a little while beyond 100%, but then it gets throttled down, because it's only an F1 micro instance. Now that this has been running for a little bit, if we head back to the bucket, we might see the file show up. And indeed we do. There's our file. Well, without SSHing to the machine, without doing anything to it directly, we managed to have it start up, complete some work, and output its information to 3 different places. We saw information in the Google Compute Engine Monitoring tab. We saw Stackdriver logs, which if we refresh, shows that the startup finished. And we saw the file show up in the Google Cloud Storage bucket. Now this instance is still running, but if we wait a little while, we see that the graph shows it's not doing any more work. So we should definitely remember to either stop or delete this instance. Before you do though, you might consider SSHing to the instance and taking a look around, like maybe running some of those script commands yourself. Well, I'm done with this for now, so I'm just going to delete the instance. Well, I hope you found that helpful to see how quickly you can go through something like this challenge lab if you understand what you're trying to accomplish in advance. If you plan out your actions and have a clear understanding of the data flow, both that you yourself are performing and the ones that you trigger, that'll really set you up for success. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, please feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.